Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, Some Dungeon Guy. Today we're taking a look at Inkarnate VS Wonderdraft. Which one do you pick? Well, I'm taking my years of map making experience and putting it to the test. I'm going to be showing you some example maps, some hotkeys, some how-tos, and some pros and cons. So stick around to the end to see which one I recommend for your map making. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you like what you're seeing and want to see more Dungeons & Dragons role-playing content, and leave us a comment below for future video ideas or if you see something you'd like to see different. Now let's get into it. Alrighty folks, as promised, we are bringing you today Inkarnate vs. Wonderdraft. Alright, we're going to take a look at both applications, talk about some pros and cons, and kind of figure out which one you might like to map with best. I have a preferred method, of course. If you've watched any of my other videos, I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible and just kind of give you an idea of some of the pros and cons to both, okay? So we're going to do a basic simple listing and kind of talk about some of the features that both of them share or that are different. And these are some of the bigger features. There's lots of small ones. First thing we're going to talk about is cost, okay? So Inkarnate does have a free version, so you can hop in, give that a try, basically indefinitely. It doesn't give you a lot of assets and it only lets you save 10 maps. But it is free. There's a couple pay options after that. You can pay $5 if you pay monthly, or $25 a year, which is only $2 a month. Wonderdraft is a one-time purchase, which gets you $29.99, gets you the entire application to use as you see fit. Free trial. Yes, Inkarnate does offer a free trial, so you can use the application, see if you like it. Wonderdraft does not, which is a con on Wonderdraft, but not a deal breaker. Alright, offline access. Inkarnate is a big no, okay? It uses a web browser, mainly on desktops and laptops. You can view maps with your mobile phone, iOS or Android. It's a little tricky, but you can view them, but it does require online access to use the application. Wonderdraft, on the other hand, does allow offline access, which means you're on your computer, your internet goes out, you still have access to the program. If you put it on your laptop and you travel over to your friend's house, you can absolutely use it, go to the library, etc. On the other hand, the offline access is awesome. The browser access certainly has its perks. If you go to a friend's house and realize you wanted to show him a map or look at a map or anything like that, that option is available basically anywhere you go. Map auto generation. So in Inkarnate and Wonderdraft, which I've not covered in a video yet, but both of them offer map auto generating. They do it in a slightly different way. Wonderdraft lets you generate some land masses and water masses, and then has sliders. You can sort of raise the land and lower the land, which is kind of nice. I'd say it actually wins in the map auto generate. Inkarnate does offer a map auto generate function, so it just can automatically generate a map based on how much land mass percentage you want versus water. So both are good. I'd say Wonderdraft wins that. Assets included. Okay, now, we talked about cost at the beginning. Well, Inkarnate does cost a yearly amount, right? But you get tons of assets, 30,500 plus. And I say plus because they do add, they do change, they do upgrade those. Wonderdraft looks, to the best of my estimations, looks to come with about 1,800. So as far as assets with the program, it is fairly limited. The biggest thing about that is that while Inkarnate does let you use custom assets, you basically upload one at a time and you can make those, which is great. Now Wonderdraft, here's a big perk. Wonderdraft lets you download map packs, whether that's from Wonderdraft or from third parties. You can download asset packs as you go. Now they cost somewhere between $5 and $10 usually, but and that does add to the cost. But that is definitely a big perk in Wonderdraft's favor. Okay, so yeah, that create custom assets, and I say one at a time because you basically upload one image at a time to be an asset. I don't know of a way that you can upload asset packs. Now Wonderdraft, I'd say this is a win. And creating battle maps, okay? So Inkarnate will let you create battle maps, dungeons, overworlds, regions. It basically lets you do whatever you want as far as mapping. Now, on the other hand, Wonderdraft does not. I mean, you probably could make it create a battle map, but it is limited in that regions and world maps are basically its bread and butter, okay? You draw large maps of large scale, not intimate encounters like you might find in a specific town, house, etc. All right, next we are looking at Inkarnate sample maps, okay? So we've talked about some of the pros and cons, but here's some actual examples of maps. Now, this is an Inkarnate map I made through my video tutorial series. See the links below in the comments. So this is, a map I put together probably 45 minutes to an hour, give or take. Now I do have some Inkarnate experience, so that certainly changes the amount of time, but as you can see, water details pretty good. The shading on the ground is something you can do fairly well. The assets look nice, they sort of pair well together, but it gives you a pretty good layout in my opinion as far as assets and ease of use and things like that, as well as the frames around the borders. Now, the next thing we're looking at is a sample from Wonderdraft. Now, this took about the same amount of time. I was messing around with Wonderdraft a little while. I am not as fluent, but you can sort of see, as far as an overworld map, it gives you some pretty good options. The lakes and rivers, you can pre-generate those, which is kind of nice. Towns all kind of look generic because there's not a lot of assets, but they do a pretty good job of representing them, and especially if you like their style. One thing you may notice on the left-hand side is that you can actually paint some of the mountains. So some of their assets are what they call paintable assets, which is kind of nice because as you brush a color over the land, you can actually paint the assets as well. As far as which asset pack you like, it's certainly down to personal preference. All right. So you've decided to go with one or the other, and you're in, or maybe you're still deciding. Well, one of the factors that would get me are the ability to use the program easily, okay? And you've seen some examples of how the maps can turn out. Now, here are some of the hotkeys inside of the app. So Wonderdraft, this is sort of a brief list of the hotkeys. The one thing I don't like is that it uses some odd keys. Like, so for your brush size, your brackets are the hotkey. The mouse wheel is probably the best one because you can actually scroll it up and down and change your icon and your asset and your brush size, which is super nice. And there are some good hotkeys. Now, one thing to tell you is that without using control or any of those things, you can see that the Inkarnate map keys are certainly more in number. And one thing I really like is that a lot of them use your ASDF left keyboard position. Okay, so once you have your hand in a regular typing position, things like lowering and raising your brush size, your opacity, all that stuff is in one hand. So you don't actually have to move your other hand. Your right mouse can, for the most part, move the map around. You can hold the space bar, which is again already under your left hand. You can scroll in and out to zoom. So personally, I find Inkarnate's hotkeys a little more intuitive, and there's certainly a lot more of them pre-generated inside the actual map or the application. So again, maybe you like a lot of them, maybe you have a certain style. Inkarnate has, to me, a better hotkey setup because they're more intuitive. Again, all with the left hand for the most part. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you through a little bit of time lapse, a brief map making experience in both applications. So we're going to start with Wonderdraft. Okay, I'm just going to create a basic map, nothing particularly fancy. Like I said, I'm a little bit familiar with the program, so it's not too bad of a process. You'll find that it's not intuitive, but it's also not difficult. Okay, there's several of the controls over on the left, and we're going to use the landmass wizard. Okay, and you can see on the right we can generate the land, and every time you generate it, generates a different one. And there's some sliders so that you can increase or decrease the water and land, just to kind of an outline of how you like. Now you can manually use the brush tool and you can make land. Notice that it doesn't give you the sharp and jagged edges that Inkarnate might find, so they're mostly smooth. And then you can use the raise and lower tools, to sort of give it more of a texture along the outside of land. You can make islands. Now this tool is very cool. I think it's nice that you can sort of raise and lower it. It gives you more of a three-dimensional effect, like actual land would be represented. Now we're going to move on to some assets. You can see on the right-hand side there are several mountain assets, right? And we're just going to click them through just like we would any other mapping program. Pretty straightforward process, the overlay. And one thing I will say in functionality, Wonderdraft does a pretty good job. It is not as smooth if you hold the mouse button down. So like these applications are okay, but if you start getting too close to the other assets, it doesn't like to lay them down and duplicate them. But, that's really just a minor quirk. Inkarnate has a little bit of that sometimes as well. Now, we can then, stick some hills. And just very quickly, you can see a map start to come to life. You can turn on the spray tool as well. So the spray brush will allow you to sort of populate in mass, which the Inkarnate does a little bit as well. One thing I really like about the Wonderdraft version, though, is the longer you hold down, like that tree spray can, The longer you hold it down, the more dense it gets. So it actually, you can sort of hold it and get the density you want. So you can start off really low, whereas Inkarnate, you have to lower the density each time you make a pass. That's a win for Wonderdraft, I would say. So we've kind of gone through. You see we add some trees. We're going to go through and make some paths. Now, the path tool is very similar to Inkarnate's. Do I have a preference? Probably not. They're both close enough that I'm happy with them. You can see here it's pretty easy. Now I'm clicking the mouse several times just to make different waypoints so it makes my map have a little bit more curve. I will say it gives you some options for it to be kind of a jagged map with the roughness and things, and some pretty good textures. I think the path textures are a little better in Wonderdraft, so that's kind of a perk, but I like the drawing ability in Inkarnate a little better. Now here we actually have a lake or water stamp tool, so we're going to stamp some lakes. And there's a river tool, which you can see it has a little bit of meander over on the right hand side. You can change the width. You can change whether or not the river sort of fades from a small river to a larger river. I like to turn that off because I like mine a little more uniform, but that's really personal preference. So just like that, you can make your river tools. And then we're going to look at, painting some of our territories, right? And remember, you can see these mountains sort of change colors all at once as I swipe a brush over them, and that's the ability to paint certain assets in Wonderdraft, which is kind of cool. The transparent mountains in Inkarnate also let you paint behind them, so a little bit of a wash there, but I think there are more paintable assets in Wonderdraft. But just like that, you can see we can brush on some color and fairly quickly start to have ourselves a little bit of a map going on here, right? All right, now we're going to go to Inkarnate. We're just going to create a new map there, and we're going to start sort of in the same process. We're going to start with land generation by using the world generator in Inkarnate. Now, as you can tell, it's not quite as many options, but it still gets you a pretty good landmass, and I really like that the coastlines already have some natural ridges in them. Now, of course, when you use the mask tool and you create land masses, you can actually have that sort of jagged edge to it. You can add, you can subtract. You can use a smooth finishing tool if you're, making certain things, or to get out like a bulk of the land. But again, you go back to this edge pattern, and it makes more of a natural contour to whatever it is you're making. Now, we'll go ahead and start adding some stamps in as well, starting again with mountains, which you can see I use much more of a colorful mountain pattern. There are some transparent ones, just like over in Wonderdraft, but I really like the textures found here in Inkarnate. Now, also on the right-hand side, you can see all of the items you're replacing are located in a list, so you can select them. You can sort of see what you're working on. You can group them. It makes it a little easier for mass edits or mass deletes and things like that. But we're just going to paint on some mountains. And I don't know if you can tell, but as you paint on the mountains, it's so much easier to paint them with a brush stroke, okay? And the hotkeys, as I mentioned before, super intuitive. Most of them on your left hand, so you might be able to tell I can like switch in between sizes and things like that fairly simply for most applications. Going to brush in some trees. Very similar tool as to the spray can over in Wonderdraft. Again, my only hesitation is that you have to manually choose the density here in Inkarnate, but that's okay. We're going to add a couple lakes in where we don't have the lake stamp tool. We can go in and use the edge tool to sort of create a natural looking lake. Okay. Make a river. And you can change the size of the river fairly simply just by changing the size of the brush, just like this. If I wanted to make a lake here, I can just redo the land, smack out a river coming out of it. And we can pop back over. Let's make some civilizations. Okay. Again, super easy. Pop a couple in here. And again, this is just for an example, although not that this map is a bad map. Any map is a good map as long as it gets your point across. We're going to use the path tool, and so you can see how you can just draw with it as opposed to having to click and hope it goes in the right direction for you. And then, sort of connect up a couple pieces of territory like so. And also like that it automatically selects it, so maybe you need to move it or alter it or change it or whatever. It already has it selected for you, which is sort of a perk. I really like that the paths turn out to be clickable items like that. Do a little bit of shading as we would have done with any other map, like we did with the other. Now, Inkarnate's shading brushes, I just like them better. They seem to have better effects, a little bit more control over them. But of course, that is certainly personal preference. Now, which you like better? I'll let you decide. All right, folks. So I'm going to make a pros and cons list to kind of wrap this whole thing up, okay? We've talked about the actual maps they produce. We've given some examples of that. We've got some statistics, the main attributes you might find, the pricing. I've got some talking points about how they're easy to use or not easy to use. We've walked through a time lapse of actually generating a map so you can sort of see what the process looks like. So now we're going to talk about a few pros and cons, okay? We're going to start with Inkarnate. Well, so for pros, I've gotten intuitive controls, and those hotkeys are mostly on the left hand, which means if your hand is used to being in the left place on the keyboard, like for A, S, D, and F, walking in video games, you're already going to be ready for those hotkeys. The brushes for the land generation give you a more detailed pattern. It's not just a smooth pattern. You can go ahead and make your edges there. Love that. You can actually still do battle maps inside of Inkarnate, okay? That's a huge benefit because you don't have to go out and get another version of another program like Dungeon Draft, for example. So all in one program, you can be doing battle maps and switch to world maps. So I love that function. And you can go in and make custom brush color textures, okay? So you can change colors in Wonderdraft, but you can't, make a specific texture, okay? In Inkarnate, you can go in and change the texture of, let's say you want to make a ground texture. You could go outside and take a picture of the grass in your yard, and you can make that a texture and make it real grass inside your map. So that's pretty awesome. And Inkarnate seems to give more options for output resolutions, meaning you can edit the map in 1K, 2K, you can do it in 4K, but you can output it in different resolutions. Whereas, Wonderdraft seems to only give you basic resolution, which you start off at, right? So if you want to change it midstream, it makes it a little harder, but you can make the map whatever size you'd like to start with. Whereas Inkarnate, you start off with whatever size map, and you can actually output it to a larger format, even if you didn't choose that at the beginning, okay? So, kind of like that option. It's just easier to change your mind halfway through rather than playing it ahead, okay? Some cons with Inkarnate. It is subscription-based, so every month or every year, depending on how you're paying, you're going to have that subscription fee come out. And the first year is going to balance out. Inkarnate works out to be just a little bit cheaper if you pay by the year for the first year. And you have so many more assets. I cannot stress this enough. So many more assets with Inkarnate right off the bat. So, you're kind of getting what you're paying for. Web access, you have to have that in order to use it. Again, if you're not connected to the internet, even if you were on your home computer where you've used it 100 times, you're not getting on Inkarnate, okay? So that's kind of a bummer. And then one of the other things I don't like is the export functions in Inkarnate can take forever. Okay, if your computer's not super quick, if your internet's not having a good day, those export functions, especially when you export into 4K and 8K, they can sometimes take a few minutes. Okay, so it's definitely going to put a damper in your creative spirit when you go to export, especially larger files. Okay, now for Wonderdraft. First thing we have as a pro is the raise and lower ground tool. We showed you that in the video where you can sort of use the brush tool and it makes the ground seem like it comes up out of the water. It makes a more realistic ground texture, especially for things like out in the ocean or along the coastlines. It really just makes it more natural, okay? Now, I love the fact that you can hold the spray can tool and you can make denser assets, meaning if you pick trees and you're using the spray can, when you hold it, it just adds more trees until it gets to where you like. Whereas Inkarnate, you have to go back and switch the density and go back over with the tool. That also works for the paint, I believe, as well. When you put that on, if you're painting a color, you hold it down and the color gets darker. Love that. There is a lake and river tool inside of Wonderdraft. So if you don't want to, make your own custom lake shape or, draw your own rivers, bam, it has a tool just for that. It's kind of handy, not a necessary item. The world generator in Wonderdraft is a little bit better, I think, the initial part, because you can pull those sliders we showed you in the video. You can pull the sliders left and right and make land come out of the water and vice versa and raise and lower the water. So that's pretty awesome. Wonderdraft, it is cheaper in the long run. We talked about that subscription-based pricing in Inkarnate, but for how many assets you get, the money's pretty close. You get it, you're not going to notice $25 a year for a really good app. But if you use it for 10 years, you're certainly going to end up paying. So it is cheaper in the long run to use Wonderdraft. And also a function I didn't talk about a lot. Wonderdraft has a great tracing function where it will overlay a image for you to trace, and you can choose from any image in your collection, whether that is a paper drawn map, picture you've taken of something. It overlays it on the screen, so it makes it really nice to trace. There is a way to do that in Inkarnate, but Wonderdraft does that just so much better. Some cons for Wonderdraft. The hotkeys, like I said, and a lot of this is personal preference, but once you get used to Inkarnate's hotkey layout, you're gonna realize it just feels better, certainly to me. So the hotkeys are spread over the keyboard, not a big selling point. The assets are limited. Even if you purchase more expansion sets, Wonderdraft does not give you a large set of assets. You know, somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. If there's somewhere you can get another 20,000 assets all in one pack or something, let me know, but it is definitely limited in that aspect. And the last con I really got out was that the color brushes are only for color, not for textures. Okay, I've talked about that with Inkarnate. With Inkarnate, you can make the texture whatever you want. You can take a picture of a grass outside and use it as a texture to make your grass in the map, whereas Wonderdraft only lets you use color. You can, there's a way to use stamps, to use assets to make a texture. You know, I looked at it, it's super finicky, but it does work. All right, without further ado, my recommendation for which one of these two apps you should get is Inkarnate. Now, that's not to say that either one of these apps is bad. Certainly not putting down Wonderdraft. I certainly am more familiar with Inkarnate, but after using them both for a while, Inkarnate, it just feels right. And yeah, you've got that subscription model, but they give you some assets down the road. It's just more intuitive. And man, you can make dungeon maps. All right, guys, it brings us about that time. If you like what you saw or didn't like what you saw, drop a comment below explaining what I could do differently or things you'd like to see added. And as always, go ahead and smash that like button if you like what you're seeing. Hit subscribe if you want to see more Inkarnate Dungeons & Dragons and role-playing content. And as always, thank you and have a good day.